And it gives me immense pleasure to begin today's session with Camilla Rees.
Many thanks to Michael Kahn and the Institute for Biobiology and Ecology for holding this very interesting meeting, and I'm very pleased to be here with you today. A special thank you also goes to IBE board member Dr. Ann-Louise Gittleman for inviting me and for her commitment to this institute. Dr. Gittleman knows, as do I, just how important the training at IBE is, that what you are learning and then teaching in your communities is what the world needs to know much more about now. Whether you are an engineer, an architect, a doctor, an industrial or interior designer, or someone responsible for the lives of vulnerable populations, like in schools or hospitals or retirement homes, you are on the cutting edge of health with the education offered through this institute. And I am so happy to see this year's conference focus so heavily on the pervasive electromagnetic fields in our environment, an emerging public health issue that will go down in history as one of the most important mistakes ever made in the name of progress. I want to also thank 3 past directors of IBE who have been teachers to me on my journey. They are Larry Gust and Vicki Warren and Robert Steller, whom I originally met at a conference hosted by Dr. Deirdre Klinghardt in Seattle. Had I not had this sneak preview years ago of the potential damage from electromagnetic fields from Larry and Vicki and Robert's presentations, and also heard patient case studies from Dr. Klinghardt of people impacted by RF and ELF and how they recovered from serious neurological problems by finding and removing the invisible sources of exposure, I dread to think how long it would have taken me to figure out that I had an EMF problem when this occurred, not once, but twice. So my deepest gratitude to your former directors and to all of those who came before, including Helmut Zia, IBE's founder, and the biobiologists in Germany. It often takes a personal health challenge for people to get serious about evaluating and remediating environments. Graduates of the Institute for Biobiology and Ecology are ironically filling an enormous hole in our healthcare system today, working precisely at the edge where health and environment converge. You are filling a hole in a system that turns a blind eye to root causes of illness, pretending that the many known sources of imbalance do not exist. You are the ones that have the real hope to offer people. You are bearers of deeper truths, counterbalancing many so-called medical professionals who would rather recommend suppression of symptoms instead of carefully evaluating and resolving a situation at its core. But there is an even more important hope that you offer society beyond the environmental detective work. What I appreciate most about the field of biobiology is its high standards for purity with regard to the built environment, and the possibilities that that purity offers all of us to remember our essence and our light. The toxic world that we have created all around us and become accustomed to is a reflection of the state of society's mind. One of the sad results today is that most children have never even known good health. They have crawled on carpets off-gassing formaldehyde as toddlers, on PVC vinyl flooring, worn clothes coated in pesticides and chemicals to prevent rotting. They've slept over 3,000 hours a year on mattresses and pillows that off-gas over 5 dozen volatile organic compounds, eaten chemical-laden fast food and engineered food that is altering physiological functioning, or perhaps been remotely monitored as infants by radiation-emitting baby monitors. We see the same sad story with elders and with everyone in between. It is beyond my comprehension how the collective consciousness could have gotten so cut off from the harmony found in nature, from the natural balance that is there to support us when we remove much of what is man-made and strive to create pristine, healthy, natural, and clean environments that mimic as best as possible the intelligence and balance in nature. We've created a world that is toxic and aesthetically unattractive and interpersonally unsatisfactory. We've lost our sensibilities as a culture and numbed our senses and forgotten what it means to be alive. I believe the principles of biobiology can play an important role in redirecting us back to true north. The standards for environmental purity that biobiology stands for can guide a hurting world back to knowing its true nature, to understanding our planetary interconnectedness, and can teach us by example the benefits of not soiling our nest, our homes, but also our planet. Respect for this planet, true respect for the life processes that it comprises, will be born of respect for ourselves and for the fact that we too are comprised of living systems. And this respect can only grow to the degree that we clear out our mind of false beliefs about who we are and what is of real value and begin to create, again, environments of grace. Electromagnetic fields in our environment are creating anything but environments of grace. Some mind-boggling recent examples of the insanity unfolding include radiation-emitting tracking tags now being sewn into children's uniforms to deter truancy, transmitters being put in children's pajamas so that the so-called caregivers can better monitor an infant's mood from afar. Nokia recently was issued a patent for a body tattoo whereby your cell phone will be able to ring under your skin. The disruption to our brain function from ever-growing layer upon layer of cumulative and chronic electromagnetic fields, combined with the velocity of information that we have access to, is fragmenting us continually, impairing our ability to pay attention and to learn, and preventing people of all ages from relating from a place of wholeness, leading increasingly to people feeling isolated in subpar states of existence, longing to connect and to experience something of meaning. And as you all know, radiating wireless smart meters that you will hear about this afternoon from Dr. Tim Sheckley, that do nothing to serve the purposes of a smart grid, but that do disrupt biology, are now polluting people's homes, invading people's personal space with behavior tracking and behavior manipulating possibilities. We are in a dark age indeed, and the Institute for Biobiology and Ecology can play an essential and pivotal role in pointing the way out of the darkness with practical knowledge of how to live in harmony with the built environment, with each other, and with nature. The Institute is a bright shining light on this planet with tremendous potential to serve society at this time. And I am so happy to be invited into this community and to offer what insights I can today about the biological effects of electromagnetic fields. I certainly don't know it all and I don't have all the answers, but I hope that the picture that I'm going to paint today will inspire you to know just how important your work is as building biologists and to encourage you to step up and take your right place in our healthcare system, collaborating closely with the medical community, as well as with schools and with employers that desperately need your services to meet the unmet needs of people. So, let us begin. The U.S. Congress passed the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which included a provision called Section 704 that took away state and local governments' rights to limit the proliferation of wireless technologies or to influence the siting of wireless antennas on health or environmental grounds. I couldn't believe this when I first heard it, and I had to go read the language for myself. Section 704 was one of the biggest power grabs by our federal government since the time of the railroads. It laid the groundwork for the uncontested rapid build-out of cellular infrastructure across this country. State and local governments would not be able to protect their community's health from wireless antennas, even if the radiation-emitting antennas were opposite a school, a daycare center, a retirement living home, a person's home with a pacemaker or other medical implant like a deep brain stimulator in Parkinson's, or with a chronic illness, unless citizens could find other reasons to argue against the antennas besides the biological and health effects. This was absurd. There was also a second major failure of government in not requiring pre-market health testing of radiation-emitting consumer technologies like cell phones, Wi-Fi routers, wireless computers, portable phones, wireless baby monitors, as there was plenty of evidence, including from our own government's military and naval research, as well as in science from other countries dating back to the 1930s, documenting the harmful effects of microwave radiation. In fact, there were Senate hearings on this very topic in 1977, 35 years ago, focused on the impacts of microwave radiation effects on the brain, long before the consumer cell phone industry even existed. The rollout of this trillion-dollar wireless industry, whose products we enjoy, has in many cases been a travesty for human health. It is impacting our genetic material with unknown long-term consequences and is quite dramatically impacting animals and nature, including the bees that pollinate much of our food that is necessary for humanity's survival. And the pattern of promoting technologies without consideration of the health impacts continues beyond the telecommunications industry today in the utility industry with the so-called smart grid, best known today for its radiation-emitting electric, gas, and water meters being put on and in some cases in people's homes. Ironically, this new utility metering system is exclusively benefiting the utility companies, not citizens' pocketbooks or energy efficiency or sustainability. By law, utilities can charge customers enough to assure a guaranteed rate of return of approximately 10 to 13%. This is why utility stocks are attractive to older people on fixed income, because it has this built-in guarantee that they'll be able to get that rate of return. So spending on anything is good for the utilities in this regard. But in this case, spending on smart meters is not good for the American people or for our energy future. The federal government is underwriting these meters to the tune of $4 billion in the name of clean energy and stimulus funding, when these meters actually don't have the functionality built in them to integrate renewable technologies at all, or to facilitate distributed power generation, where we as citizens become contributors of energy into the grid, which is the real power and potential of a smart grid that we must aspire to have the possibility of getting off of fossil fuels and to live in concert with nature, to stop raping the land to meet our energy needs and destroying the ecosystem and destroying the health of populations near coal mines and creating risk of irreversible water table pollution and earthquakes from fracking, all the while depleting limited resources when safer renewable energy options are available and other countries like Germany are rapidly moving to embrace them. Instead of moving us toward energy sustainability using renewable technologies that harness energy locally and that are wealth creating for people, the new smart meters being deployed may usher in an era of more centralized control of our lives and Big Brother privacy concerns, while jeopardizing the health of millions of Americans, as is now beginning to happen across the country. and as Dr. Sheckley will explain this afternoon, also jeopardizing the country economically by not making the right investment decisions. As many of you know, people are protesting smart meters in 57 towns or counties in Northern California today, where they've placed a moratorium on further rollout, as well as in 18 other states at last count, like Minnesota, Florida, Maine, Pennsylvania, Vermont, Maryland, Michigan, New Mexico, Texas, and the District of Columbia. Wireless smart meters are making people sick, and as you're going to hear this afternoon, perhaps to your surprise, the technology is totally unnecessary to the purposes of a smart grid. That is, to supply-demand balancing, demand response, dynamic pricing, renewable integration, and local generation and storage, as promoters of the meters routinely claim. In the new paper to be published in the next 2 weeks by the National Institute for Science, Law, and Public Policy, called Getting Smarter About the Smart Grid, this billion-dollar deployment has been called by Dr. Sheckley, who will speak this afternoon, a canard, a story or hoax based on specious claims about energy benefits. So, as with the wireless antenna infrastructure rollout that was facilitated by the Telecom Act of 1996, it appears our government is once again hostage of a large industry motivated by commercial interests without accountability for the public health or national economic impacts of its actions. Whether we are talking about cell towers, antennas attached to buildings, cell phones, wireless devices, or the new smart meters, it is very important that people understand what is happening at the macro level. To understand that this new, invisible, and increasingly prevalent form of air pollution from all of these technologies is having devastating effects on people's lives, causing acute problems linked to many chronic conditions, and very often preventing patients from getting well from conditions using previously successful therapies. It is essential that citizens and health professionals learn the sources of these exposures, how to measure and detect the fields, and how to empower each other to create electromagnetically clean environments and communities. I will go so far as to say that doctors today cannot practice effective medicine without this competence. I can tell you this from my own personal experience going into the homes of people with challenging physical, mental, and emotional problems on behalf of physicians. Using meters to measure what is actually going on, in more cases than not, there is an electromagnetic component to what they are experiencing. Whether it is insomnia, headaches, immune dysfunction, heart irregularities, irritability, fatigue, endocrine imbalances, ADD, or even low libido, positive and rapid changes can occur by cleaning up the electromagnetic environment. I want you to understand that besides having read a lot of the science and spent a lot of hours measuring in the field, I speak from very deep personal experience with this issue. When I first started using a cell phone regularly in 2004, I thought it was broken because I started getting sharp pains, shooting pains, and dizziness holding it against my head. I kept going into the T-Mobile store in the Embarcadero Center in San Francisco asking if something was wrong with the antenna. Then I noticed at home I was increasingly dizzy, sometimes needing to hold on to the wall to stand up. Sometimes I would collapse to the floor with nerve sensations going through my whole body, no longer able to hold my spine up. My eyesight changed. I could feel my heart speeding up inside my body, something I had never felt before. I started getting odd rashes. I was more fatigued, needing to lie down a lot. I didn't understand why I couldn't pull my thoughts together to even do my to-do list, but could do it in the coffee shop across the street. Why I was so edgy I couldn't read and didn't feel well enough to drive. Why I was tossing and turning in the night with disrupted sleep that I had never had before. or getting dizzy using my new laptop. Eventually, I learned I was being impacted by a wireless router on the other side of the wall from my bed. New neighbors had moved in 3 months before and placed an internet router inches away from me through a thin wall right near my pillow. And over time, my body naturally started operating erratically. And I believe your body would have too, given the very strong source of exposure in such close proximity. I had followed deep instincts to move my bed to the other side of the apartment, to move my desk to another place. But never, I was curious about these instincts, but never would I have guessed that it would have anything to do with wireless technologies. I assumed, like everyone else, that they were safe. Once I figured out the problem, I moved. I spent 9 months recovering in a low EMF environment, doing a living foods diet, getting sunshine and exercise every day. And I believe if I had not removed myself from this exposure and pursued the path that I did, that I would not be speaking with you here today. I'd be going from doctor to doctor, being offered drugs, counseling, homeopathy, acupuncture, supplements, detoxification powders, sleeping pills, air filters, hormones, and eventually, after spending a lot of money and getting nowhere, doctors would have given up on me. I'd be like many others today, not able to function adequately in a wireless world. Maybe ending up in Greenbank, West Virginia, a radio-free zone for astronomy, home of the National Radio Astronomy Observatory's listening telescope, where sensitive people in the U.S. are moving. Or in a radio-free zone in southern France, or in Italy, or in Spain, or radio-free and electricity-free regions of Sweden, northern Sweden, where the government has EMF-free rest houses for people to visit who have been burdened by excessive exposures, and where they officially acknowledge the condition as a functional impairment, not as a disability, but as a functional impairment originating in the external environment, as is also the case in Spain. Here's how a little boy who's electrically sensitive has to live in Oslo, Norway, going about daily life protected by RF shielding fabric, something that is very controversial and that I do not recommend. In some cases, people are moving into caves. Others are looking for real estate in the protected hills or selling real estate near street intersections where antennas are often located, or walking away from beautiful, sunlit, high-floor apartments, seeking out rear-floor apartments on low floors where exposure risk is lower. This is an apartment building in New York City where being on a lower floor did not help because they were on the front of the building. The first floor apartment on the corner of the building was a bedroom where a man I went to inspect his apartment had lung cancer. I found out that all the way up till the 8th floor on the corner bedroom, everyone had cancer except for one person, and that person had had 3 miscarriages. So where you live in an apartment building is extremely important. This was the culprit, a 1 block up diagonally across the street, an antenna farm on a 5-story building. Pre-war buildings generally are better, but than the modern high-rises where today you need to be looking for the antennas that they're placing in the elevator shafts in these buildings, as well as sometimes in apartments themselves. Most people who have become severely electrically sensitive from a cell tower exposure or from a close encounter with a router, as in my own case, may never fully recover. It is estimated that this population is 3 to 5% in developed countries, with 35% of people mildly sensitive, like some of you may be. The only ones I know who have recovered and can function fully again after severe dysregulation are people who moved or spent an awful lot of money doing very thorough remediation. anything other than as soon as possible returning the body to its natural electrical state by whatever means, supported ideally by the natural frequencies in nature, is not, in my opinion, a very good option. This is a graph from a study by Santini et al. Done in Spain, published in La Presse Médicale in 2001, showing the kinds of electrosensitivity symptoms people experience near cell towers. It's a very good handout to give to your clients because people get it. It's a good visual. Other research showing electrosensitivity symptoms to know about, I'll mention a few here, include a study from the Netherlands which found significant effects on well-being such as headaches, muscle fatigue, pain, and dizziness near antennas, as well as a study from Austria documenting headaches, cold feet and hands, difficulty concentrating, tremors, loss of appetite, and feelings of exhaustion. The symptoms in the latter study by Hutter et al., it should be mentioned, occurred at 0.04% of the U.S. exposure guideline for ambient RF. Children experience these symptoms, and I'd like to now play a video for you.
We've been talking a lot about this up in Collingwood, and you may know that there was a private school up there that pulled the Wi-Fi out this month because of health concerns for kids. And the reason is we were at a kindergarten tea, you know, the cutest thing in the world. And my wife said, "Oh my God, I'm getting this headache like I do whenever you're on your cell phone in the car. Now I'm getting nauseous. Now I think I'm going to faint." And she asked the principal, "Do you guys have Wi-Fi in this school?" And she said, "Yeah, there's a transmitter right above your head." And she said, "Geez, I think I'm reacting to it." It was a severe reaction. And she said, "You know, do they need this in the kindergarten class?" She said, "No." "Do they need it in the grade 1, the 2? Oh, she said, "There are 9 computers in the grade 8. And other than that, they're not using it in the school." So she said, "We can actually turn off 8 of these 9 transmitters." And I said, "Boy, that would make a big difference, you know." And then it all made sense. It was all logical. They were going to do that. And then the school board got involved because they had the switch. And they said, "No, we will not turn off those transmitters." They sent us a letter and said, "You're welcome to work this out at your own school." And they secretly sent another email to the principal saying, "Do not do business with these people. Do not turn off the Wi-Fi." And we thought, well, that's really odd for them to be behaving in this duplicitous way. And we talked to other parents about it, and they said, "Well, you know, what could the symptoms be?" And we said, "Well, you know, we've read nausea, headaches, vertigo, dizziness, or skin rashes, rapid racing heart." And they're, one by one, they would go slack-jawed and say, "You've just explained the last 18 months of my life." We've first had to put them at the front of the class and then the back of the class because their eyes were always blurry and they were getting headaches. We went to the eye doctor, their eyes are perfect. We went to the neurologist, they checked out. They had an MRI, they're okay. Now they've been on a heart monitor. There were 4 kids in our school wearing 24-hour heart monitors to school. There were kids who were coming home with headaches every day and taking 3 and 4 ibuprofen or Tylenol or Advil. And their mothers, you know, one of the mothers was a nurse and saying, "This isn't normal among a 13-year-old girl or a 12-year-old girl to be having, 60, 80, 90 days in a row a headache after school," but not on the weekends, not in summer holidays, not in Christmas holidays.
So an excellent reference source that lists the studies that I've mentioned, as well as many others relevant to children in schools, is the Bragg Antenna Ranking of Schools report by Dr. Magda Havas. This report, which you may want to share with schools in your communities, reviews the electromagnetic spectrum, summarizes the science showing effects from low, intermediate, and high frequencies, makes recommendations for electromagnetic hygiene in schools, and links to many of the best reports and resolutions, including the Freiburg resolution signed by thousands of doctors in Germany. The Bragg report also graded all schools in U.S. state capitals by their proximity to cell towers. They looked at how close is the closest tower to a school, how many within a quarter mile, or about 400 meters, where most of the science is showing electrosensitivity symptoms and cancer incidence, as well as how many antennas within 0.6 of a mile, or approximately 1 kilometer, to account for children being more vulnerable. 63% of U.S. students in state capitals are at risk for possible microwave radiation overexposure based on distance as a gauge. As you know, there are other factors besides distance, such as the characteristics of the antenna, the direction, the topography, the foliage, and so forth. Many schools were also found to have antennas and cell towers right on school property. Based on the evidence of risk in the scientific literature, the Bragg report recommended that no school permit antennas on their property and have a setback of 1,500 feet for neighborhood antennas near the school. I was in Utah last week speaking, and we ran a Bragg report for that town. And I wanted to show it to you quickly because it's something that you can do in your communities to wake people up. It's a real eye-opener when you show the comparison of the different schools, and black being the worst, red, amber, and green. That's Bragg. The report will teach you how to create your own Bragg report if you're not a school in a state capital. And my assistant Emily is also doing this for communities if anybody needs help. She's a pro at creating these reports right now, but it's a big eye-opener. There was a review of the cell tower science published by Dr. Henry Lai and Blake Levitt in 2010 that was published in Environmental Reviews. It included over 100 citations, approximately 80% of which showed biological effects, and the vast majority of those adverse. This report also builds the case for setbacks and the need for new exposure guidelines reflecting more realistic, multiple, and cumulative exposures instead of the assumption of a brief single exposure on which the guidelines are based today. On August 31st this year in Rajasthan, India, the largest state in the Republic of India, the High Court banned cell towers on or in the vicinity of schools, hospitals, and jails. In compliance with this order in September, 2 weeks later, 200 cell towers near schools were shut down. And another 500 are coming down near jails and hospitals. India has also been out front and looking carefully at the wildlife effects from cell towers. In August, an expert committee submitted a report to the Minister of Environment and Forests. They reviewed over 919 studies of the effects of mobile towers on animals, insects, humans, and plants, and the panel found that 593, or 65%, showed harmful impacts. The report said, the review of existing literature shows that the EMRs are interfering with the biological systems in more ways than one, and there had already been some warning bells sounded in the case on bees and birds, which probably heralds the seriousness of this problem, the seriousness of this issue, and indicates the vulnerability of other species as well. The panel recommended a law for the protection of flora and fauna, that new towers should not be permitted within 1 kilometer of existing towers. It calls for strictly controlling installation of mobile towers near wildlife protected areas like bird sanctuaries, turtle breeding areas, bee colonies, and zoos. And it added that public consultation is to be made mandatory before the installation of cell towers in any area. In May 2010 in India also, an interministerial committee took a precautionary stance and recommended maximum power densities of cell towers be reduced by 90%. This was considered too important to be left to the Minister of Health or Minister of Telecommunications alone. And a multidisciplinary strategy may be something that we need to consider in this country as well to assure that the best interests of society are considered. Other good news comes from Chile. In June, after debating this subject for over a decade, the Chilean Congress voted by a large majority of the members of the Congress for something called the Towers Act. It limits the power of antennas, calls for infrastructure sharing, allows citizen participation in the approval or denial process, requiring prior permission of and terms from local communities, allows for a reassessment of tax valuations if you live near a cell phone tower. Communities are also being to be compensated by the telecom providers where there are towers, providing funds for public space enhancement and improvement. And importantly, there was a retroactive component establishing mitigation in areas that are saturated with antennas, including those close to homes or institutions such as kindergartens, health centers, or schools. This law took effect in June. Chile's Transportation and Telecommunications Minister, Pedro Errázuriz, said, he said, in addition to protecting the urban landscape and the goodwill of the neighborhoods, the new law takes care of the most important, the health of people, in a precautionary manner as recommended by the World Health Organization, setting strict limits on the power of antennas. He is referring to the May 31st decision by the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer to classify radiofrequency radiation as a Class 2B possible carcinogen. For the first time, this decision provides an official scientific basis on which governments, schools, and parents can legitimately call for precautionary measures regarding radiation-emitting devices and infrastructure. Robert Bond, who was the principal author of the IARC statement, has clarified that this decision to classify radiofrequency radiation, which is based largely on cell phone science, also applies as well to all radiofrequency radiation from towers, from smart meters, etc., from radio towers. Another sign of progress comes from Germany, where this summer the environmental minister, Peter Altmaier, issued a 10-point plan, and his 10-point plan, number 6, was to improve protection from electromagnetic fields. It's very encouraging. Recently, there was correspondence between the Israeli Minister of Health to the Minister of Education there called for caution regarding Wi-Fi in schools. Rabbi Litzman said, "I do fear that there will come a day when we will all cry because of the irreversible damage that we, in our own hands, cause the future generation." So countries around the world are beginning to take electrosensitivity and the health ramifications of this radiation seriously, but we are not seeing very much progress here in the United States. Although federal legislation has been put forth by Representative Dennis Kucinich, H.R. Bill 6358, that's called the Cell Phone Right to Know Act. It's calling for warnings on cell phones, for a national research program, and for the EPA to update the SAR. And this was introduced just as he was leaving office, unfortunately. But we do encourage you to ask your representatives to support this. One of my favorite resources summarizing the science in terms of electrosensitivity is called the Electrosensitivity Primer, issued by Electrosensitivity UK. They're a charity. For a very small donation, you can download this report. It provides a very well-referenced review of electrosensitivity symptoms, the pathological markers for it, treatment approaches, references to other illnesses that are linked to electromagnetic fields, and references to resolutions on this topic by organizations and of international scientists, physicians, and psychologists. This year, in March, the Austrian Medical Association issued guidelines for the diagnosis and treatment of electromagnetic related health problems. This is an excellent report to know about, published by Mobilewise in the UK last year, specifically focused on the cell phone risk to children. It has hundreds of references in there, specifically focused on risk to children. Finally, I just read yesterday that Nobel laureate Luc Montagnier is working on 5 papers on this subject. He is the French virologist who discovered the HIV virus and who is now looking intensively at subtle energy effects. When his colleagues in Europe had trouble understanding this new direction that he was taking, they kind of poo-pooed his exploration, and he's now being hosted by Beijing University that has rolled out a red carpet and actually built a building in his name. Here's a shot of the density of antennas today compiled with FCC data a few years ago. We have to always remember to take the macro view to look at, do we understand the insanity of what we're doing. This is another one that I like that is a shot of the simulation of the secondhand electrosmog in Salt Lake City created by at Arizona State. The peaks you see are not steeples from Mormon temples, but they are hot spots, though it is well known that churches today are taking thousands of dollars per month and putting antennas in their steeples. Some of you may have seen this. This depicts the growth in electromagnetic fields over the past decade. The levels are now over 8 times the level of the Salzburg State Safety Standard and the recommended level of the Landmark Bioinitiative Report in 2008, which was a review of the science by 13 international scientists showing biological effects at non-thermal levels of exposure. For perspective, the FCC guideline for the Wi-Fi frequency range is 10,000 times higher than the bioinitiative recommendations. Beyond electrosensitivity symptoms near cell phone antennas, many studies have shown a connection with cancer. In this study, German doctors have found that the proportion of newly developing cases is significantly higher among patients who live within 400 meters of a cell phone transmitter. The relative risk of getting cancer in this study increased by 200% after 5 years operation of the transmitter. In Israel, a study by Wolf et al. Similarly showed that within 350 meters of cell phone antennas, there was a 300% increase incidence of cancer among men and women, and a 900% cancer increase among women alone. Faculty at Tel Aviv University found a 4-fold increase in cancer rates among Israelis living for over a decade within 350 meters of a cell phone tower. Tower exposure studies in Israel have also shown, as has been shown in many other countries like France, Germany, and Austria, neurobehavioral malfunction, lower than average performance tests for attention, short-term memory, and problem solving, and a host of other inexplicable illnesses. Here's an image from Full Signal, the film that you saw on Friday night, and it shows that cancer clusters in the town of Isifia, Israel, occurred only in the vicinity where the cell towers have been placed. Who would like to see this kind of research done in the United States, in our towns? I will add anecdotally that it is not uncommon to hear people who have been diagnosed with cancer say that their diagnosis was preceded by many years by symptoms of electrosensitivity. Very briefly, here's an overview of the kinds of issues that are biological effects of electromagnetic fields in the literature, emitted by cell phone, by microwave cell phones, Wi-Fi, portable phones, etc., and more. So as you can see, there is a broad range of effects, and including important DNA effects that you heard about yesterday from Dr. Blank. So there's no question that electromagnetic field exposure is degrading our biology. This is a chart prepared by physician and surgeon Dr. Carlos Souza showing the kinds of, at what levels, how much lower than our safety guidelines are effects appearing in the science. So you see that psychological changes are have shown in the research at 50 times less than the guidelines, and on up to enhanced cell proliferation evidenced at 76,000 times less than our safety guidelines. And to complete the view of the macro, the big picture, this is a shot of our electric grid. We forget that mankind has only lived with electricity since the late 1800s. And now, on top of electrification, which was the first wave of electromagnetic pollution, and on top of the radio and television towers, and then the cell phone towers, and the antennas on rooftops and the sides of buildings, and the microwave radiation emitting consumer technologies that we live with, and in some cases, in the case of children, sleep with, we are now adding a very large new microwave component to the electric grid in the form of the smart meters. I recommend to you the small book by Dr. Sam Millam, retired from the State of Washington Department of Public Health, called Dirty Electricity. In it, Dr. Millam describes his research that links electrification in the early part of the 1900s with many diseases of civilization, including heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and suicide. By 1900, it was well known that New York City residents lived 10 years less than rural residents. And it was always assumed that this happened because it had to do with changes in lifestyle, diet, less exercise, less fresh food, and perhaps more infection in urban environments. But his research shows the higher incidence of mortality from all of these conditions in urban electrified areas as well as in rural electrified areas, but not in non-electrified rural areas. And he measured this for every state in America as for using data from the year 1930 and 1940. Dr. Millam is convinced that the plain old electricity and the dirty electricity that often comes with it has been vastly underestimated for its role in disease. He notes that the old order Amish who live without electricity have 40% of the non-Amish diabetes incidence, 50% of the non-Amish cancer rates, and no childhood ADHD or obesity. As I dug into this issue of the biological effects from electromagnetic fields, I found myself, I couldn't pull away from it. I learned more and more about the biological effects at non-thermal levels, and that we've known for over half a century, actually closer to 3/4 of a century, that microwave radiation is harmful. And that an industry-funded report released in 2000 called the ECOLOG report outlined the primary biological effects very clearly, including gene toxicity that you heard Dr. Blank talk about, impacts on cellular processes, cell communication, and cell proliferation, pathological effects on the immune system, central nervous system, including the blood-brain barrier, neurotransmitters, EEG, and cognitive functions. Effects on hormone systems, including the stress hormones and also melatonin, which is a highly important cancer substance. The ECOLOG report also presented extensive evidence for the EMF association with cancer and infertility. It called urgently for lowered exposures. This industry-funded review of the science, published almost 13 years ago, called for teaching children to lower exposures with headsets, to minimize exposures created from carrying mobile phones on or near the body, for research in many areas, and for research on electrosensitivity and its incidence, which would, he quote, which would acknowledge the failure of traditional scientific methods to address the problem. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the heart of the debate that rages on today, continually confusing people. Conventional physics measures would suggest that the radiation from cell phones isn't hot enough to cause damage, and that because it can't directly break an electron off an atom. So industry, regulators, and standard-setting bodies have hung their hats on this false concept. despite voluminous amounts of research showing biological effects at non-thermal levels of exposure, and I don't frankly know how they get away with it. And not only do they not take into account the non-thermal effects, but they also don't take into account the magnetic fields from the battery in a cell phone, and the engineering methodology used to measure what they do measure, the SAR, has been shown to grossly underestimate risk, especially the radiation absorption in the brain and bone marrow of children. A study published in Electromagnetic Biology and Medicine last fall has shown that using an FCC approved superior assessment methodology called finite difference time domain involves MRIs and computer simulation that can adapt for differences in body size and age it shows that children and small adults absorb significantly more radiation than previously understood. They absorb 2 times the radiation to the head as adults, up to 3 times in the brain's hippocampus and hypothalamus, greater absorption in the eyes, and as much as 10 times more in the bone marrow compared to adults. The bottom line is that 50% or more of the cell phones today would not pass muster, according to one of the study authors, using this more accurate methodology. Here's a quote from Alvaro de Salas, who is the lead author. He says that the higher risk of tissue damage from common cell phone use demonstrated in this study using computer simulation method of SAR assessment suggests prudent public health policies globally would call for cell phones to be manufactured without the ability to use the phone against the head, nor with a speakerphone because of the battery effects, but only allow communication with a wired headset. This would dramatically lower risk of biological and genetic damage to the population and to children and other especially vulnerable populations such as pregnant women by keeping the radiation thereby away from both the head and the body. Now, this kind of evaluation was done with a cell phone, and it certainly would be interesting to have this same kind of evaluation done of other radiation-emitting consumer technologies, like what is it doing to our body from laptops and other iPads and baby monitors and so forth. This is from a study done by Om Gandhi at the University of Utah in 1996 that shows how much more vulnerable a child's brain is on the far right side. Tumors that are deeper in the brain are more deadly. And their children's cells are reproducing more quickly, their immune systems are not as developed, and they have a longer potential for a lifetime of exposure. Other countries are taking a stand to protect children. In Russia, officials have recommended that children under 18 not use a cell phone at all. Countries like United Kingdom, Israel, Belgium, Germany, Finland, India have discouraged the use of cell phones by children, but we're not seeing any such recommendations here. This is an important study by Leif Salford, who's head of the Department of Neurosurgery at Lund University in Sweden. He's shown that low levels of microwaves cause albumin leakage in the brain, and which suggests that other substances like toxins can also be getting through the blood-brain barrier. But what's important about this study, there's actually been research going back to the early 1980s or before showing blood-brain barrier permeability. But this study did not just show a dose-response relationship where the higher the exposure, the greater the damage. It showed a paradoxical effect where the lower the there's the damage to the brain. And it showed that lower level microwaves were causing this leakage into the brain, and that the weakest fields, he says, according to our findings, are the biologically most effective, and this poses a major problem. So it's not just about the strength and how close you are to a power source, but the weaker fields in this study cause greater permeability in the blood-brain barrier and greater neuron death in the brain. This was an important study by Nora Volkow from the NIH done in collaboration with the Brookhaven National Lab, published last year, and it showed a 50-minute phone call increased brain glucose metabolism. This was the first piece of research funded by the U.S. government in a long time. We used to have the finest bioelectromagnetics lab in the world, and that function was basically shuttered in the early 1990s, just prior to the Telecom Act of 1996. Actually, I go back. Areas in the brain that were subject to electromagnetic fields in the Volco study included the orbital frontal cortex, the temporal lobe, and the superior temporal gyrus. These regions play critical roles in behavior, judgment, impulse control, and sensation, and they're all excited by cell phone radiation. The Volco research was on the heels of an important study in Nature Neuroscience by Caltech neurobiologists that showed very weak electric fields in the brain tissue significantly affect functioning. And we're talking about electric fields from that are underneath power lines, but also the low-frequency magnetic fields from mobile phone batteries that induce electric fields in the user's brain. Skip over that. An epidemiological study with 13,000 participants done by UCLA and Danish research of interest found that offspring of mothers who used a cell phone during pregnancy had a 54% higher chance of having emotional and social problems in school by the time they were age 7. And that number increased to 80% increased chance of emotional and social problems if the child were using a cell phone by age 7. A pilot study by Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt of 10 situations showed that mothers who had autistic children had 20.7 times the power density of microwaves in their bedroom where they slept during pregnancy than the mothers who had the healthy children. They also were found to have 8.4 times the body voltage levels of the mothers with the healthy children. In his experience, EMF levels are predictive for autism in the bedroom of the pregnant mother, are predictive for autism, hyperactivity, and learning disorders. This is a graph showing the trend in the autism growth. And as you can see, it was in the early 90s that this graph started trending up. We desperately need to do serious research on this. Autism diagnoses are doubling every 5 years now, and the effects on the fetal brain are known to be 100 times that of adults. Dr. Klinghardt finds that if you protect the sleeping environment, children are greatly improving. This is an important study just recently come out by Dr. D-Kun Lee from Kaiser Permanente in Oakland. It shows that EMF exposure in the womb is linked to increased risk of childhood obesity. Children of the women exposed to magnetic fields of more than 2.5 milligauss for at least 10% of the day, 2.4 hours, while pregnant, had twice the risk of becoming overweight or obese by the time they were 13 compared to those exposed to 1.5 milligauss or less. And it was a statistically significant finding. It was a dose-response relationship. Dr. Lee says, maternal exposure to high magnetic fields during pregnancy may be a new and previously unknown factor contributing to the worldwide epidemic of childhood obesity and overweight. This is from the Center for Disease Control. It shows you the growth in obesity generally. 1/5 of American children are obese today. And of course, the obvious question that needs to be answered is that if magnetic fields are contributing to obesity, are the radio frequency fields and microwaves as well? EMF effects on the developing fetus gained credibility a few months earlier than Dr. Lee's study in research from Yale, led by Dr. Hugh Taylor. It showed that mice exposed in utero to high-frequency EMFs from cell phones developed neurological and behavioral problems by the time they became adults. Dr. Taylor says this is the first experimental evidence that fetal exposure to radiofrequency radiation from cell phones does in fact affect adult behavior. He says, we have shown that behavioral problems in mice that resemble ADHD are caused by cell phone exposure in the womb. The rise in behavioral disorders in human children may be in part due to fetal cellular telephone irradiation exposure. Taylor attributed the behavioral changes to effects on the development of neurons in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is the same area associated with ADHD. That study was published just after a report produced by a Yale-affiliated organization called Environment and Human Health, where Dr. Taylor was a co-author, which reviewed the cell science and made recommendations. John Wargo, who was the lead author of this study, said, the scientific evidence is sufficiently robust, showing that cellular devices pose significant health risks to children and pregnant women. The weight of the evidence supports stronger precautionary regulation by the federal government. The cellular industry should take immediate steps to reduce emissions of electromagnetic radiation from phones and avoid marketing products to children. Dr. Taylor, who was a co-author, says the human brain is especially susceptible to numerous environmental insults that can produce irreversible damage during critical periods of nervous system development between conception and full maturity. A number of peer-reviewed studies reported changes in the nervous systems of rats, mice, and humans following exposure to cell phone radiation. These include diminished learning, diminished reaction time, decreased motor function, reduced memory accuracy, hyperactivity, and diminished cognition. Summarizing the growing literature in the field of psychology, Professor Wargo has said, cellular devices can create feelings of psychological dependency. Common effects reported in the literature include distraction, isolation, hyperactivity, inability to focus on complex and long-term tasks, and a heightened sense of anxiety. This is an important study in the Journal of Pediatric Psychology. They looked at the effect on teenagers, 18,000 teenagers, of using a mobile phone after lights out at night. This study showed poor mental health, suicidal feelings, and tendency to self-injury. This is a study that I was involved with. It actually, in part, was conducted at Paula Baker Laporte's house in Santa Fe. We looked at the effect from portable phone radiation on the heart. The first phase of this study has been published on the first 25 subjects. And as you can see, the heart rate almost doubled in the case of subject B, and overall 40% of subjects had an instant, immediate effect on the heart from portable phone radiation. Professor Yuri Grigoriev, who is chairman of the Russian National Committee on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, sent us an email about a study of which he was the lead author. It was published in Russian, looking at the effects on children from RF microwave exposure. He says, our recent 4-year monitoring of effects from cell phone radiation on children demonstrates an increase in phonemic perception disorders, abatement of efficiency, reduced indicators for the arbitrary and semantic memory, and increased fatigue. Over the 4-year monitoring of 196 children, ages 7 through 12, who were users of mobile communications devices, a steady decline in these parameters from high values to bottom standards compared to controls was observed. I'm going to skip over this. There's a little video of children talking about their problems. For those of you wanting to delve into this subject more and understand the mechanisms of action, the best of the collective wisdom was published about a year and a half ago or so by the International Commission for Electromagnetic Safety, which is a group of about almost 200 scientists based in Italy. I'll talk very briefly about genotoxicity because you heard a lot about this from Martin Blank yesterday. We've known since 1987, a study in 1987 showed non-thermal exposure of RF produced single and double-stranded DNA breaks. There are not just a few studies in this area, there are actually many studies showing DNA effects going back many decades. The Reflex report was a study conducted by 12 institutes in 7 countries, and it confirmed the long-term genetic damage in the blood and brains of users of mobile phones and other sources of electromagnetic fields. This is a picture depicting the DNA disintegration, comparing a 24-hour cell phone use to disintegration from 1,600 chest x-rays. And as you can see, the DNA disintegration is quite comparable. Professor Franz Adelkoffer, who headed this study, says there is real evidence that hyperfrequency electromagnetic fields can have genotoxic effects, and this damaged DNA is always the cause of cancer. We found these damaging effects on the genes at levels well below the safety limits, and that's why we think it is urgent to base our safety limits on the biological effects, not on the thermic ones. They should be based on biology, not on physics. We were delighted to learn that last year Professor Adelkoffer was invited to speak at the Safra Center for Ethics at Harvard on the subject of the lack of integrity in science. You heard yesterday from Martin Blank about his research showing that the coil-of-coil structure of DNA effectively creates a fractal antenna, which means that DNA is exquisitely sensitive to electromagnetic fields of all kinds and more sensitive than other tissues in the body. I think that we need to all take very seriously the proposal by Dr. Blank and Reba Goodman, his colleague at Columbia, which they put forth in a paper in June, calling for the replacement of the SAR as a measure of EMF radiation with one that would document the changes in DNA biochemistry from many different frequencies. I'll talk very quickly about fertility research. There was a study, well, there are many studies, but this one is by Agarwal et al. From the Cleveland Clinic. It shows a dose-response relationship between RF exposure and as the sperm count at an infertility clinic decreased as the duration of daily exposure to cell phones increased. In the highest exposure group, 1/3 of sperm count was lost with over 4 hours of male cell phone use. And 50% of the remaining sperm showed physical abnormalities, did not swim well, or were non-viable. Here's another study from University of Newcastle in Australia, where linking mobile phone radiation to reduce vitality and motility of sperm. These effects were shown at exposures greater than 0.4 watts per kilogram, of course, in contrast to the FCC limit for radiation intensity from cell phones of 1.6 watts per kilogram. There's an excellent summary on this subject done by Alistair Phillips at PowerWatch called Research Studies on EMF Connection with Human Testicular Cancer, Damaged Sperm, and Reduced Fertility. We have also created Electromagnetic Health, a handout that's good to hand out to parents. It's called Letter to Concerned Parents on Fertility and Other Risks to Children, summarizing the science in this area. Overall, the impacts have been shown on sperm count, motility, viability, morphology, testosterone levels, and, of course, DNA. I just read an article yesterday about a sperm bank in Israel commenting that only 1 in 100 sperm donors make the cut today compared to 1 in 10 a decade ago. They're seeing less quality, quantity, and motility. Half the couples in Israel who are trying to conceive need fertility treatment today. And the woman, that scientist who runs the sperm bank, says if this is happening to the guys on our A team, in other words, the sort of young college students that are the sperm donors looking to make money, we might only be seeing the tip of the iceberg. This is a great ad created by Radiation Research Trust in the UK that anybody can download. Your future is in your hands. It's been put in bathrooms, male bathrooms in the city of London. Here's what they look like, to educate men on the importance of not putting the cell phone in the pocket. In France, they're a little more outrageous, and the men are protesting the fertility effects in their underwear. Okay. So there's no research that I know of on the effects on female eggs or egg count. However, there is research showing the effects on fetuses subject to mobile phone radiation. There's been research showing faster heart rates, more behavioral and emotional changes, genetic changes, altered brain development, cell death, autoimmune responses, and more. Animal studies have shown a significantly reduced number of ovarian follicles in female offspring when mothers were exposed to mobile phone radiation in pregnancy. We'll talk just very briefly about cell phones and brain tumors. There is industry research in 1999 showed increased risks of brain tumors from cell phones. George Carlo, who led the $25 million industry-funded study that, as has been mentioned, has never been published, has said, we identified a statistically significant doubling in the risk of neuroepithelial brain tumors among those using cell phones 500 minutes per month, and a statistically significant dose response for acoustic neuromas when those using cell phones for more than 6 years were included. We know that there are 7 types of cancers that have been associated with cell phone use: glioma, acoustic neuroma, meningioma, salivary gland cancer, eye cancer, testicular cancer, and leukemia. And there is a mounting body of anecdotal evidence linking it with breast cancer, but no research yet to point to. Risk for brain tumors from cell phones in children. A Hardell study from Sweden showed that there's a 680% increased risk of brain cancer from cell phones on the side of the head where they use the cell phone when the cell phone use began as a teenager or younger. And he showed that children have nearly 4 times the risk compared to adults, and the numbers are roughly comparable for portable phones as well. This is an industry-funded study that also showed increased risk, 274% risk of brain cancer from cell phones in children. However, as we typically see, the conclusions of this report and the PR spinning it out into the media claimed that there was no risk found. In fact, there was a 274% increased risk. They showed children have 4 times the risk as adults, that younger children have greater risk, and that girls have greater risk than boys, and so forth. They said, this is just to give you a sense of what we're up against from a PR point of view. The authors found little or no evidence that mobile phones increase brain tumor risk, and the single positive association could be explained by bias or chance, when in fact multiple associations were found in this study. It also said the lack of genotoxicity of mobile phone radiation has been confirmed by experimental animal and laboratory studies. They cited only 2 studies from 1999 and 2001 instead of the multiplicity of studies that have been published I showed you the list of earlier. Also, no conflict of interest statements from the authors were included in the study, when it's well known that many of the authors' studies are associated with industry. The Danish study somebody mentioned yesterday is also another example of what I would call fraud, scientific fraud. Every time that it was originally done in 2001, and they parade out a new update to this study regularly that I'm sure you've seen across the headlines of papers all around the world, claiming no link between long-term use of cell phones and tumors of the brain or central nervous system. And as Dr. Blank explained, they excluded business users who were the heaviest users from being considered a subscriber because they weren't individual subscribers. So they also called a user anyone who makes one call a week for 6 months. And then finally, in each follow-up study, all of the post-1995 cell phone users, subscribers, are even if they've started to use the cell phone, they're still classified as non-subscribers. So essentially, this study is comparing one exposed group to another exposed group. It's fraud. We are seeing a growth in brain tumor incidence trends. In the little data that's available, we're seeing, you can see Norway and Finland are both increasing, although mortality is not yet. This is data on the temporal and frontal lobe tumors from England, clearly shows the long-term trend in malignant tumors. This is a parotid gland increase in Israel since 1970. So I'm going to quickly play a, can you hit the audio on this? This is Dr. Thomas Round. I'm just going to play part of this because I want you to understand the role of dental issues in electrical sensitivity
in Switzerland and Germany. The cell phone towers, they can interfere with the patient very much, and they can produce real disturbances of the unconscious nerve system, mainly on the unconscious nerve system. What is unconscious nerve system? That's the system which regulates the body without that you can do something. You know, for example, heart rhythm, or the breathing, or the digestion, or all these things which you do not steer by intention, but they are steered by the unconscious nerve system. And this can be severely compromised by mobile phone towers. You can compare with the radio station and the radio receptor, you know, the radio itself. You need to catch the vibration of the radio. You need an antenna. You need a radio device. And that's the same thing in the human being. The waves are around, and you need your individual antenna which fortifies it. And this fortifying can be an implant, a root canal, or very much a amalgam fillings. Therefore, when we have a patient who says, oh, close to my house they built a tower and so on, and since then I'm sick, well, this is very well possible. And then I say, what, we need to change your antenna. And this would be the first approach before you move out or before you sell the house. We can try this, and in about half of the patients it really works. Their resistance to the waves, to the electromagnetic load gets much better. One case, very solid kind of 35-year-old man, really somebody who stands with 4 legs on the world, absolutely not a neurological or psyche patient. And he got sick, and he got a trigeminal neuralgia. He went to several doctors. He went to the university clinic, and they all said, well, it's just idiopathic. It just comes from, well, nobody knows, and you have to live with it. But he could not live with it. He even got suicidal. Then he came to us, and we found that there is a root canal with 2 metals in, and on the root canal there was an amalgam filling. And then we said, well, you have to remove this. And he said, well, I have this 20 years before, 15 years even before my neuralgia came. And the neuralgia came when they built the tower. And this made You know, the antenna he had before, but no tower who made the vibration. Therefore, he did both. He moved to another place, and also he removed the mercury things, and now he's totally healed.
Okay, so I wanted to have you have a chance to hear Dr. Rao talk about the dental connection, because I think from my experience it's extremely important when people have a mouth full of fillings or metal braces in children. Some children are starting to have seizures that have metal braces instead of the plastic braces. It's really important to understand what we're doing when we're putting metal, especially in our mouth. So here we are, and where will it end, and where do we go? And I certainly don't have all the answers, but here are the directions that I think we need to move in. We need to have smart new research. In other words, we need to do a few select studies that are have a high eye-opener ability, that will be able to link diseases that are extremely costly to society to this problem. Part of that involves pulling together the existing research and perhaps doing new studies like on autism or obesity or other areas. I believe that we need a centralized research and communications service, so that when the studies are paraded out by the industry and they successfully, their PR people, get it on the front page of all the newspapers, so that we can debunk. We do a lot of this already, but it's exhausting, and there are few people doing it, and it needs to be done a lot more. There needs to be a central place where journalists can go and they can read the truth about these studies, and so I'd like to see that funded. We've talked a little bit, Dr. Sheckley and I and others, about analyzing the energy efficiency and sustainability implications of a wireless versus a wired approach. I think we also need to better explain the ecosystem effects that are happening, and so that we can reach into the much better funded environmental community, so they can see this as their issue too. We do have a paper that will be coming out hopefully by the end of the year on this subject, a white paper. We also, I think, need to focus on the national security risks to get people's attention to this issue, not only on the health grounds or environmental grounds, but looking at the national security risks and activating the country on that basis. We desperately need a DC lobbying presence, a professional DC lobbying presence, and we need to be in their face, this movement. I mean, I've been in this field 6 years. There have been people in this field decades before me, and we haven't made any progress. And we have to acknowledge that we're not succeeding, and we need to somehow come up with the funding for a DC lobbying presence so that we can be on top of everything related to this issue that's happening at the FCC, the FDA, the EPA, Fish and Wildlife, OSHA, Americans with Disabilities. There's so many fronts that we could be working on if we can get funding for a professional lobbying effort. And of course we need communication initiatives. And we need to be able to counterbalance that powerhouse spin doctor machine of industry. I think perhaps, besides all these ideas and great things that could be funded, I think that perhaps the most important change that needs to happen is at the level of our consciousness. How do we get people to stop going into denial and to start to be responsive? Well, I think that people need to be in a place themselves personally where they can understand that they're alive, that we're part of a bigger ecosystem, that we're interrelated with it. And how do you accelerate that process in people? How do we do that? I've given a lot of thought to this, and I don't know the answer besides just one person at a time waking up. But one thing that is very encouraging to me, and I know it's a controversial subject in this community, because issues haven't been fully ironed out yet, but the earthing science, that there are 15 published studies now on earthing that's showing that our health on many levels, many systems of our body are greatly improved by connecting to the electrons from the earth, that we are actually supported. We're like a tree nobody would deny that a tree needs the earth, needs the ground to live and to thrive. And I like to think of ourselves as walking trees, that the science that's building is showing that our immune system is supported, blood viscosity is thinner, pain goes away, insomnia is greatly helped. There are definitely issues that need to be clarified in terms of how to do this safely, but we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because the potential, if what it looks like is actually happening, it looks like earthing may have the potential to to accelerate that shift in consciousness. Once people understand that they are part of nature, they are one with the ecosystem, then all of a sudden they're going to start to respect their own life more and be able to respect the planet more, and reverse some of the destructive things that we've created on the planet. So I think I'll just end there and open it up to any questions. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to play a song, actually, that I'd like to share with you all, that was created for us by hold on a second. That was created for us by Native American singer and songwriter Shelley Morningsong from Santa Fe. It's called Heal the World Today, and we'll just end on this note. Go ahead and make sure the volume is up.
There's something stirring in the air, an invisible poison, hidden warfare. Toxic airwaves flow through our brains, the beast of convenience, a runaway train. How much more can our mother withstand, or the children who wait to inherit this land? Like a cancer waiting, assaulting the air, an invisible poison, hidden warfare. Call out to the universe, cry out for strength, on behalf of the human race, make this world a better place. We need to make some change. The sky, fish in the sea, bright sunflowers, sweet honeybees. Feel the effects of technology's rise, corporate deception, government lies. The time is now, and we must realize we can make a difference, and it's just not wise to pretend we're okay while the storm rages on. Our micromagnetic machines growing strong. The earth is a gift to all of us here, but our careless acts make the future unclear. What will we say to the heavens above? Where is the urgency? Where is the love? Call out to the universe, cry out for strength, on behalf of the human race, make this world a better place. We need to make some changes. We've got
thank you, and thank you, Shelley Morningsong.
You mentioned something about the speakerphone, not using the speakerphone and a battery connection that that's new news to me. What's that about?
Yeah, I learned that myself from Professor Alvaro de Salas in Brazil. Evidently, when you use the speakerphone, it uses more battery power, so you're exposed to more magnetic fields. So that's why he calls for, phones that don't even have a speakerphone. That is the method when I need to use a cell phone that I use. It's certainly better than right up against your head, but their magnetic field issues are important too. With PDAs, I've seen enormously high levels of magnetic fields, many, many times the levels that have been shown in research to create miscarriage. So it's really an important factor, maybe more important than we know.
Thank you, Camilla. We met with Dr. Milham testing outside the home of a resident that lived surrounded by wind turbines in Palm Springs, California. I wondered if you would mind at least addressing that, what you saw there.
Yeah, this was last November, and we went out to measure the home of somebody who lived near this very large wind farm, and the levels of dirty electricity were, I don't remember them exactly, but I think it was Dr. Milham had a Stetzer meter that was had no limit. It wasn't like, didn't just go up to 1,000. It was, I think it was like at least 10 or 20,000. Was it 20,000? Yeah. So, and the person was very sick, and so he said it was the highest level he had ever seen near a wind farm.
I'm glad you mentioned safe earthing. So safe earthing is not lying on 8 hours a night on a plugged-in thing, but safe earthing we could do it every day, like wash your hands 15 times or just run the water 15 times. You get a quick discharge. I'm glad I'm a male because I can pee in the grass outside. The ions you get back from the earth just boost you. It's not a joke. It's true, because you get a direct connection, the fastest you can get. I'm not promoting everybody go out now in the break, but collective earthing or something. But that's very interesting, and I'm glad you mentioned it. But you have to do it more often, and we all don't do it. We run around with Chinese-made plastic shoes. Go to the washroom and 15, 20 times hold your hands under the water.
Diana and I measured some air tubes and lined different kinds of air pieces, and we didn't find any that were really good in terms of, the distance was great, but we didn't find any that didn't have some field coming up. So I was wondering if you could recommend any air tubes or what you found.
I can't say that I have measured a lot of them. I've seen research that shows that if you have any kind of hardwired headset connection, you reduce the exposures by over 95%. So I think probably any kind of headset is good. But I use, I don't really use it anymore, but I used to use the Air Tube headset, and I know there are differences in quality, and there are some that are being made that are cheaper than others, and the ones that I use you can get at less EMF. I also really like I don't have one with me, but those new phones that look like the old AT&T phones that are fabulous. Oh, you got one right over there, a purple one. The kids actually love these phones, and it's just, they just love it, and they want them in every color. And the only one, I think you have a different brand than the one that I have. You have the Native Union, it looks like. I use the one that's the Yubz, Y-U-B-Z. You can find them on Amazon. They range in price from about $25 to $50. And the Yubzs are good. They do a great job. And that one tends to fall apart a little more, I hear from people. But
I thought the talk was wonderful. But whenever we have a talk that talks about whole cell phone issue, we talk about the damages of cell phone towers and then how we can use our personal cell phones more safely. It's the same dilemma I find in construction about, we talk about how light frame construction is inherently evil, but if you're going to do it, here's how to do it better. So I feel I'm caught in the same moral dilemma, but it's definitely, when we look at the damage that the towers themselves are doing, and we know that, how can we live with cell phones? I know it's hard to live without them too, but I just wanted to recognize that here.
That blue phone, does that have a speaker in it? Because that speaker might have a magnet in it, and that if it does have a magnet, it would be carcinogenic, because the magnet of the speaker would alter the magnetic field lines of the Earth, and your brain cells go into a spin, and medicine knows since over 50 years that that would be carcinogenic, so you shouldn't even phone on the landline for hours because of that effect. So you can run a little compass over it, and if the compass moves, it's no good.
I think it's up to all of us, and not just building biologists, but absolutely everybody. I think we need to get in touch with our roots in this country, the people who came here and the revolutionaries, the people who took a stand for things that mattered and made sure that their values were at the core of the society that they were living in. We need to get in touch with that. And I am personally very much all the time connected to my ancestors who were movers and shakers, change agents. I think that, but the denial is, people are shut down and they're busy and they're stressed, and somehow that consciousness needs to change so that they can care about themselves, recognize they're comprised of living systems, so that only when you care about yourself can you really care about the bigger planet and what we're doing to society. And you know what? If we don't do it fast enough, we'll be suffering the consequences. And some people I know who have been in this field a long time say, Camilla, I've just, I just want more people to get sick faster, because it's only when we start to see, Dr. Klinghardt says the autism rate in 15 years, he's predicting that every child will be somewhere on the spectrum. Maybe we need to wait, and then maybe it'll be too late, and maybe it won't, but I personally can't just do nothing.
You were absolutely right when you said there's no evidence showing there's a relation between EMF and breast cancer. In an epidemiology kind of study, but there's a lot of cellular evidence. And I spoke to the scientist who was working on the breast cancer study in New York area, and I asked her, how do you reconcile the difference between the epidemiology study and the fact that it doesn't show up what you expect from the cell studies? And she told me that the fact is that there are all kinds of water issues. This was done on Long Island, and that they may have interfered with it. But anyway, it was a little bit of hand-waving. But the fact of the matter is that there's very solid evidence in terms on the cellular level. This was originated by a study by Robert Liberty, where he found that normally the growth of breast cancer cells is inhibited in the evening at nighttime when melatonin is secreted. But in the presence of EMF, the melatonin is shut down. The EMF works very much like light, which is another form of EMF. And it shuts down the melatonin, and then the breast cancer cells grow. And it's been shown in several labs. I think there are about half a dozen that have repeated that experiment. So it's real solid cellular evidence. But the thing is, Robert Liberty was vulnerable. And I think that the industry was out to get him. He was brought up on some kind of falsifying evidence, when basically what he had done is he published a paper where one of the figures, instead of having the data, had recalculated data, where he showed something, and he was asked to retract that, which he did. But the fact is that they were out to get him. He was one of the martyrs, I guess you'd call it, in the war to try and bring EMF to the public. I think he published this stuff quite a ways back. There was a paper that he published in a compendium. I'm trying to think of the authors of it, where they had a whole lot of electromagnetic research, and he actually cited, I think, half a dozen papers that had repeated his finding.
Thank you, Mark.
Did you find any papers that looked much more at the modulation patterns that are being used? Because the ELF modulation of the microwaves has a much bigger biological effect than just the microwave power density levels. And that's the problem with a lot of pulse transmissions, because the frequency spectrum of pulses is very wide and includes the very powerful biologically effective ELF effects. Have you seen much of that and looked at that data? This goes right back into how electromagnetism was developed from Maxwell onwards and how it was modified. Biological effects, of course, are from magnetic and electric fields, but potentials, which were basically taken out of our modern Maxwell equations, were part of Maxwell's original theory. So subtle energy effects through the magnetic vector potential have a tremendous capacity to structure water. Cyril Smith has shown that, and other people. So you can take toroidal type of windings that have all the magnetic fields contained within the toroidal structure, and you can do DNA changes. May-Wan Ho in England showed that, and other people. So we can have powerful effects on living systems, biological systems, based on the vector potential. Quantum physicists understand that they don't even have to use magnetic and electric fields. They can derive it all from the A field or the magnetic vector potential. And once we start looking at the full research electromagnetically, it becomes very interesting to create biologically based systems. And this, I think, is what's going on now. It isn't just the power density, it's the modulation patterns and how we actually create these magnetic vector potential fields in living systems. So what I'm saying is the biological research is using electromagnetic field equations that are somewhat limited and truncated, and they're very good for creating technology, but they're not so good for creating effects on living systems, and that needs to lead to a reformation and an expansion of our research on a biological basis, not just on a technological basis.
Camilla, this is more a comment. 2 years ago, when I was proposing a mobile phone antenna installation in my neighborhood, I did some extensive research, and I found 3 epidemiology studies, one in Austria, one in Israel, and one in Germany, where part of the conclusions of the epidemiology studies were that cancers in women, and particularly breast cancers, could be a marker for RF radiation exposure. And I'll give you those references. Okay.
Thank you, Michael.
I want to just make a plug for the panel this afternoon with Dr. Deborah Davis. She loves to talk about the breast cancer connection, and you may have seen some of her footage of people that keep a cell phone in their bra, and the tumor is developing right exactly where the antenna was. But anyway, everybody make sure to come to that panel. We've got some real luminaries. Deborah Davis, Duncan Campbell, who's a visionary and new energy thinker, and Jim Turner, who heads Citizens for Health, which, by the way, he's also the chairman of a new organization called Voice of Hope, H-O-P-E, H.O.P.E. And what they're doing is they're building, they're getting people in states all around the country to start to communicate with their members of Congress, not to lobby them on anything, but just to walk in the door and introduce themselves and say, look, we represent the people in your district who care about natural health and healthy environments and so forth, and we just want to know you and to let you know that you can call on us at any time when there's a bill that comes up or you need some guidance, that we represent people in your community. And so the strategy is expected to work very well, where they're building relationships, and then when it comes down to a moment when there is a piece of legislation, they can be mobilized en masse. So I recommend everybody go to the Voice of Hope website and get involved and just go on one of these calls to your members of Congress. It's a very smart long-term strategy.
Thank you very much, Camilla.